We have with us today Mike Hutchinson. He is a games designer who you might be familiar with from games such as Gaslands, Billion Suns, and more recently Hobgoblin, which is already an award-winning game, despite the fact that the Kickstarter starters don't have their hard copies yet.
Not
But
yet.
that's all right. No, I'm anxiously awaiting my copy, and I
Oh,
have the
well,
PDF, so I can't really complain. Um, He's got some other games in the works that we'll get into later, and he has a book that he has co-written with his friend and podcasting partner Glenn Ford.
mhm.
What's the title of that book? I'm sorry, I don't have it written down here.
The title of the book is The Fundamentals of Tabletop Miniature Games Design. And then I think it has a colon, a designer's handbook.
All right, yeah, I'm looking forward to that one as well. And I know we've got some games designers in the club/audience. So okay, so you have designed a number of miniatures games. Would you just give us like a quick breakdown of what that is, just to provide some context for the audience?
Yeah, sure. So I started my journey in gaming back with like model making, and I was making like plastic airfix kits and model airplanes and stuff. And at some point I discovered a Games Workshop store. I think it was in the town that my grandparents were living in, and I discovered this world of like fantasy gaming. And they had like board games, but they also had miniatures, and I was totally fascinated by these things. And it combined with like my love of model making and my love of playing with toys. And so miniature games are at their heart. The kind of miniature games that I make are at their heart um, games which invite you to bring in objects that you have created, whether those are miniatures that you've painted or buildings that you have built out of shoe boxes and Pringles tins and stuff, and they are a mechanism and a game that invites you to create your own environment and gives you all the rules that you need to sort of play across that environment. And I've always found them totally fascinating and absorbing. I like playing board games and I like playing card games, but I like playing miniature games a lot more because they just allow a very rich kind of connection between the imagination and like the physical hobby aspects of things, whether that's painting miniatures or building scenery and stuff. The things that I make tend to be what I would describe as non-discrete miniatures games, which are not the sort of board games that have lots of miniatures in but still have squares that you move around on, like a chessboard or like Warhammer Quest or something. These are games where you invariably need a tape measure, and these miniatures can go anywhere that they like in the play area, and it's non-discrete in terms of the movement being wherever they want to go. But it's also non-discrete in a couple of other ways. The one way is that like the game doesn't tell you what it is that you're supposed to bring. So like if you play Monopoly, you know exactly what it is. You've got a board, you've got these playing pieces, you've got this number of cards. With non-discrete miniature games, it tends to be like, well, the size of the table isn't super controlled, and how many buildings you've got and what those buildings look like depends on what you've built. And they're also non-discrete insofar as they don't tell you what to bring in terms of the models that you're controlling. So it's not like a game of chess where you get a set of pieces on one side and you on the other. Part of the fun of these games tends to be like building your own army or your group of characters. And to a degree, there's a sort of crunchy list building, like building a deck in Magic the Gathering. Like you're trying to find all the synergies and trying to get like a cool gameplay engine to work. But it's very much possible in these games to create a very thematic and kind of narratively evocative group of individuals or army. And so lots of people will create things because they've got a sense of what their army does in the world or where their group of characters sits inside the background setting, which you can do a little bit in like a Magic the Gathering deck by saying like, well, this is the vampires deck or whatever, but it doesn't work the same way because you don't have as much freedom and openness in the system. And that's why I design it's why I design miniatures games. It's why particularly I design a kind of miniatures game that's described as miniature agnostic. So I don't have a range of miniatures to sell you. I write games which are accepting of other people's miniatures. I like to think of it as I'm writing software for the hardware that is your miniatures collection. So your miniatures collection is kind of like an Xbox that I'm writing games for.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, I know it's brought me into the miniatures game more because I know it's a story I've heard a couple of times, but Gaslands was the first game
Mm.
that I played because it's like you buy the book and it's I think it's like some $25 to $30 or something, um, and then the models are Hot Wheels, and it's like I was like I can get a Hot Wheel for $1, and so I have craft paint. Like I didn't have model paint at the time, but it was just like it was such an easy like entry level thing to do, and it that really yeah the definitely the hobby portion of it definitely appealed to me. I always my dad really likes model trains.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought, well, these are really cool, but like, what if Godzilla was in that corner? Like, that would be so much more fun.
Yeah,
And like,
yeah.
then I found out that people do that, and they have rules about how to make Godzilla fight King Kong
Mm-hmm.
on the tabletop. So that I do. Um, it's a neat hobby. I definitely
Yeah,
would
and
go
I
for
mean,
it.
Gaslands, like one of the reasons Gaslands kind of hit a, what's the phrase I'm looking for? It struck a nerve with people, and it kind of went so well, is that it connects with something, I think connects with something fairly primal about miniature games, which is they are quite a lot like being a kid and playing with toys at their heart. Like you can elevate them to quite an extreme skill level, but at their heart, like you're pushing toys around on the table. And so when you get
Right.
actual Hot Wheels cars and you're sort of just going brum brum brum, then that works really well. I think it's why the X-Wing miniatures game was so successful as well, because you get these tiny little spaceships and you can zoom them around, and
Yeah.
no grown man like in his right mind can resist saying pew 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 as he does that. Like it's just, there's just
Yeah.
something very primal, and it connects, I think, to something quite joyful. And Gaslands with its toy cars, like they're so easy to get hold of. There's not a big barrier in front of it, and because you're using toy cars, like it sort of feels, they're so cheap. It sort of feels okay both to sort of experiment with the hobby and maybe mess them up a bit, because they're not like precious objects in the way that like a 15-pound miniature would be. Um,
Yeah.
and equally, like because they're kind of scrappy, beaten up toy cars anyway, and it's a post-apocalyptic like setting, you can kind of say, well, I can use any old crap can be the setting that we're driving around, the scenery that we're driving around. Like it seems
Mhm.
to have invariably created a sort of permissive atmosphere for people to like just do stuff that's kind of a bit crud, and that's fine. It'll look great.
Yeah. Yeah. So that kind of takes us to this idea of like because I think there is a real synergy between um, that kind of attitude of bring what you've got as far as gameplay goes to sort of the world building aspects of what you're doing. So like what to you what makes a good like a well built world?
Well, so I think the critical thing for me is that building worlds for tabletop miniature games is a specific activity. It's probably an activity that is shared with some other genres, but
Mm-hmm.
because of because of this thing where I'm asking you to bring in your objects, your figures, your warriors, and I'm asking you to build the actual physical environment that we're going to fight in. This isn't, and it's a game, so like what happens on the table is extremely emergent from the rolls of the dice and the decisions that the player makes. It's very very distant, not having a lot of direct experience with writing worlds for fiction directly. Like it feels to me quite distant from that, because I'm having to provide a set of hooks, a set of open doors, and then not describe too far beyond them, because I'm needing to create something which leaves a lot of space for the player and
Mm-hmm.
for their imagination and for their things to arrive in. So I suppose for me, like a good setting is one that has got a really strong initial overarching conceit. And I mean that partly about like what's the overall sort of driving force of the world, what's its like
Mm-hmm.
major conflicts, or what's the themes of its major conflicts. And then it needs to have a really strong conceit about who you are representing within that world, because it's not interesting from a game setting perspective. It's not interesting to have a very big, well considered world unless I know exactly who I am in it. And you see this a lot in video games, in like the tutorial moments in a video game where they're working hard to communicate efficiently, like who are you and what are you trying to achieve and what are the obstacles standing in front of you. And to a degree, I'm trying to do the same thing, but I can't say exactly who you are, and I can't set the obstacles. I can't say exactly who the obstacles are because they're probably going to be the other players.
Right.
So to be a bit more concrete about this, like Gaslands, I think, it's a very light setting, but like some things that are effective about that setting are, um, you are a person in a vehicle that is trying to win a race, because if you win enough races, you will get a ticket to Mars and you will escape this hellhole that the Earth has become, and you will escape to Elysium. Like, very simple, like, main conceit. We know who you are, we know what you're trying to achieve. It's easy to understand who the people standing in your way are. And like, this I think feeds into the other part, which is for miniatures games, and I can talk a bit about why this is. Like, I lean very heavily into genre tropes, and
Yeah.
like in way more kind of cartoonish ways than if I was to write. If I was to write a piece of genre fiction, I wouldn't even lean into genre tropes as hard as I do when I'm writing these kind of gaming settings, because I need to communicate things really efficiently to players who are going to want to. They need to want to create objects, toy cars or buildings or paint miniatures that kind of fit with their imagination of this world. And subtlety is not super helpful
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
in that particular thing. So with Gaslands, like, I'm trying to hook in as quickly as possible. I'm trying to say to people, like, think about Mad Max, think about the Running Man, think about the Hunger Games, like, put all of that into your mind and then look at your toy cars and have a good time. And that will, like, give enough people expectations of what the genre tropes are, and then I have to deliver on that with the gameplay and with the elements of the setting that come through the names of rules or the names of the factions or the names of the characters or whatever. So I think the other half of this, like, what's a good game setting, it has to have a very strong conceit about who I am and what the conflict is that I am engaged in as my avatar as a player. But it also has to, I think, it tends to rely very heavily on genre tropes, and to a degree the effectiveness with which you can evoke those genre tropes tends to, I think, kind of establish how effective the game setting feels to players, even if it's not the most novel thing. If it's like setting up a set of genre expectations and then nailing them with the mechanics or the names of the rules or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
then people are like, yeah, this is the thing we're playing, I get this.
Yeah. Yeah. We have kind of a, like, we talk about core concepts. It's one of our kind of, some Worldcraft Club jargon. And that
Mm-hmm.
like fits really well with what you're saying. And like, so even though like you're kind of taking that core concept and you're saying, this is pretty much all I'm giving you, like, it's now up to you. Another Worldcraft Club word we use is the visitant, like the person that's visiting the world that you're building. So like when I write, like, my readers are my visitants, but for you, like, so I kind of have to take people by the hand and show them stuff more deliberately, whereas you're like, here's a sandbox to play in. So like I think that, but even so, like, there's still that element of like having a really solid idea of what is it that is your core concept. Like, I think it should start filling in some of the color of the world, even like whether it is a game or it is a book or a um, something in the middle, like maybe an RPG where there maybe is um, more things that are maybe concrete. But there's still, I tend to think of it as a spectrum. Like if I'm watching a movie, someone has thought really carefully about what is and is not in every single shot
Mm-hmm.
and what sounds I hear and all that. And so like to me that's like one extreme end, and then the other extreme end is maybe like gaming, like on the tabletop, where you're playing a character or whatever, you're making the story. You just needed a sandbox to play in. And I do think that, it all comes down to how faithful were you to those core values that you started with. um,
Yeah, and when it comes to like a comparison with RPGs is useful, I think, because
mm-hmm,
an RPG, um, I'll use a piece of like video game jargon here, but like the verbs that are available to you as a player character in an RPG tend to be quite broad. I can do a lot of things, I can make a lot of different choices, I can approach situations in lots of different ways. And so, to a degree, like world building, setting, exploration in those games needs to account for the fact that it's just like players can just turn around and walk in any direction they want for as long as they like and kick anything over
mm-hmm,
that they choose to. With the sort of miniature games that I write, it tends to be a much more limited palette of actions. I mostly write games about racing or fighting just because that's what I do, and most miniature games are about racing or fighting. In fact, most miniature games are just about fighting. Um, but the palette of verbs is relatively small, and so it's quite easy to understand as the author of the game, as the designer of the game, like where the stories possibly could go, or what kind of verbs you need to account for. And so I feel, you know, I feel nervous about writing an RPG because I'd have to provide an enormous amount of latitude in what was going on in the world, or expect the GM to fill in all that detail. Whereas in a miniatures game, I can leave a lot unsaid because I know that you're not really, like in Gaslands, you're not really going to leave the racetrack. So as long as I've described what the racetrack looks like, and like why the people are looking at the racetrack, like that's enough. And that's a tiny, tiny sliver of the world that I have to provide in high resolution, and everything else can just be super blurred out in the background because it just doesn't matter. There's no verb that the player interacts with that gets to that part of the world.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I liked the way that you approached it in the book for Hobgoblin, because
Mm.
your conceit there was, like, whatever minis you have, or even whatever mini army you've always wanted and you've always wanted to be good, it can be what you want it to be here. You get to and you can clear up some of my interpretations here.
No,
But
yeah, sure.
one of what I liked in the rule book, though, is that you do have a map, which is great. Everybody loves a fantasy map. Like,
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
just,
it's like you just gotta have one. It's
yeah.
great.
But the world, Rotvarlden, am I saying that
Yeah,
correctly?
that's good enough. That's as good as my pronunciation is.
Okay. Fair
It's
enough.
it's a Swedish word, and my pronunciation of the Swedish is not brilliant.
Okay. All right. That's fair. But yeah, so you have this world set up, and the way the world is working is there's been some kind of like wintry apocalypse on the surface,
Hmm.
forcing everyone down in. And so you have this note on apple slices, I think the little pull out in the book is called,
Mm.
and or the little call out. And so you say, like, here, I've provided you a map. It goes from the surface to the core, but it just represents like one apple slice. Like, it's a whole globe. And so, like, if you don't find the subsetting you want here, you're free to make your own. And,
Yeah,
like, I think that was
cut
a
cut another
really
slice. Yeah.
right. I think that was a really clever way to like provide some lore, or maybe fluff is the preferred term in miniatures gaming. Um, but you provided like a a world for people to play in, but you also said, hey, like, if you've got this idea for a fantasy army, and your idea for where they come from isn't represented here, that's fine. Like, that's all are welcome.
Yeah, and there's a number of things in the Hobgoblin setting which are just like engineered specifically for the needs of the game and don't exist for any other reason. And so, like, Hobgoblin is a so I mean, like, the fact that it's an underground world was just a simple fact of like, okay, I've got to write a fantasy world for this setting. Where can I start that's going to interest me? And I was like, well, how about I don't draw a map that's top down? What if I draw a map like it's a like it's a slice, like it's an ant hill? like it's an ant farm, I should say. And so that got me interested, and I was like, okay, cool, like yeah, I can get into this. But the things that I was trying to find in this world were like, number one, why does everyone have massive armies all the time? And why do they keep having massive armies? And why isn't this a game about small bands of people skirmishing? Second thing was, why the hell is everyone fighting all the time? Because that's all you do, and like all the verbs available to the players are basically just brutally murdering each other in giant battles. It's a game of brutal fantasy battles. So those are two questions that have to be answered by the setting. And then the
Mm-hmm.
third thing is exactly as you say, like, how and why can I have any miniature or monster that I like in a big hodgepodge army, um, so that I'm not, because the game is not going to put controls on whether or not you can have a dwarf and a troll in the same army. It's not going to even comment on that. So now that it's possible, like, why and what's the explanation for this? And so that sort of led me to think, well, I need I need a force in this world. I need a catalyst in this world that is causing all of those things to happen. And by kind of workshopping that with some friends and tossing ideas and kicking them about, I came up with, well, there's this network of tunnels that everyone's been digging down. What if, as they dig down, they accidentally begin to penetrate through to like an older set of tunnels, a sort of shadow secondary set of tunnels that, you know, maybe the last time this happened, these, you know, the
Mm-hmm.
last set of antediluvian people like built these tunnels, and inside these tunnels, of course, there are some cursed artifacts. And instead of there just being one cursed ring, you know, there's a number of these cursed artifacts, and as they get discovered by treasure hunters and they emerge, they become, you know, they become these objects that endow their bearers with the power to obviously manifest enormous armies. You know, whether that's raising the dead or, you know, summoning golems or what have you. Like, they have some way of, you know, raising or, you know, enchanting or whatever it is, giant armies, and they are driven by, you know, by voices, by the urges of whoever the, like, you know, ancient sorcerers or whatever creatures created these things. So they're driven by, you know, evil wills that are not their own to do terrible things, whether that's like get down to the bottom of the world and break through some kind of seal, or, you know, find another magical item that was supposed to connect with this one, or whatever, you know, inscrutable machinations these ancient evils were up to. And so that for me just ticked all the boxes. It's like, once I'd got that, like, it's kind of cheesy, but like, you know, having a magic ring or a cursed artifact, like, it is older than Tolkien, and it's okay to use
Right.
these kinds of things. And so,
Yeah.
you know, going back into North mythology and pulling out these things that are so well loved and so well trotted, and just trying to find a way for me to knit those things together into a setting not that was unique because I needed to tell a unique story or create a unique IP to monetize, but because I had a set of gameplay justification
Yeah.
boxes that I needed to find answers to.
Yeah. I mean, we're big fans of the idea that like there is nothing new under the sun, right? Like, so yeah, by the time Tolkien was writing that stuff, he absolutely knew that he was just like repeating mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was, but he wanted to do it his own way, and he did. And I think, you know, that's largely what we're all doing. You know, not really breaking new ground, just putting things together in slightly different ways. Um,
Yeah, and exactly. And so, like, for me, it was a case of, well, from that core idea, can I find things that I am interested in, stories that I want to tell, sufficient that I can tell a few stories in the book, which illustrates to the reader, to the player, oh, this is the kind of space that you're allowed to play in.
mhm.
And it was fun because in the middle of Hobgoblin, there's a big block of fiction. It's basically a novella, and it's actually the first thing I've done like a sustained bit of creative writing. And because it was the first bit of sustained creative writing, the publisher that I was working with, that was Greg at Alecti Studios, he's a friend of mine, and he suggested a friend of his as a mentor, a fiction mentor. And so I
Okay.
worked with this guy called Stuart Warren, who helped me a lot with, you know, the technical aspects of writing good fiction and writing dialogue and stuff. And I want to say lots of good things about him, but I do want to point out one thing that he kind of got wrong, and it's not because he's bad at what he does, but because his instinct was to draw the threads of the narrative together to provide a really exciting denouement and find the fact that, like, oh, actually, the central character that we have invested our time in actually affected the world, and he changed, the way that this setting was.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to sort of explain to him that the reason that the story doesn't conclude, and the reason that just as you're beginning to sort of fall in love with his quest and you want to find out where he's going, I cut forward like an unspecified number of hundreds of years to an unrelated location where a bard is telling a slightly incoherent song story about possibly this character, is that I wanted to really say, like, with I can't tell the story of how this world is
Yeah.
changed, because that leaves no space for the player. The player has to see that there is space and excitement and motion, and it's unfinished, and the ball is rolling, but they are there to carry it. So you can't tell a story in the same way, because if you tell the story, if you finish the story, there's nothing for the players to do.
Right. Yeah. Why I can't? I don't want to like break what the hero fixed. Like, yeah. Um,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
interesting.
So it's really interesting in that regard, that, like, to a degree, and this is to a degree true in role playing writing as well. Like, you're creating a bunch of tension and kind of traps that can spring off to explain the fact that the players are going to take actions in the world, and those actions are going to mean something. You can't resolve any of those things. That would break the purpose of the fiction.
Right. Yeah, it definitely brings to mind Joseph McCullough's Rangers of Shadow Deep,
Mm-hmm.
where they're like, I find myself wondering, like, is there going to be like a final season kind of thing? That like there's a story, it's going somewhere, like, unlike maybe, I mean, Gaslands, like, you can imagine that just for as long as you like, there are seasons of Gaslands where the drivers are competing and someone's winning. So every season there's a winner, there's a, a coherent end, but the world can go on forever.
Right, and that's sort of why, as humans, we love sports so much, because sports tell narratives. They tell these little contained narratives, and we can understand them, and then they repeat in a very pleasing and comforting way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Joe McCullough and another great games designer friend of mine, Sean Sutter, who makes Relic Braid, which is like a little narrative miniatures game that's well worth people checking out. They both have this really interesting attitude, which is that they sort of act as the game master for somebody else's game table. This isn't
Yeah.
how I think about it, but this is how they think and talk about it. They talk about, like, they're trying to create this moment of play for people where they want to create an adventure, and they want to set the little pieces out in motion, and then say, okay, so now you roll initiative, and that kind of creation of story, I think, is super possible. It is just it's quite interesting, because the question is how much specificity you provide, how much guide rails you put around the player, how much are you telling the player that they're participating in your story, versus how much are you giving them just enough to understand how to create their own story.
Right. Yeah, and I think for people not in the know, it's just worth saying, like, what like Rangers of Shadow Deep and maybe also Relic Blade, I'm not as familiar with that one, is doing is something between like a miniatures game like you're talking about and a role playing game.
Hmm.
Um, I think is a fair way to put it. So like, and that's another point in all this, is like there really is like a spectrum here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you make the spectrum go from like, open-ended gaming to like a movie where, like was saying earlier, like everything is planned out, like a good director is showing you only exactly what he wants you to see. um but like there's a spectrum there, and I think that they have different world building needs.
Yeah,
um
and I think, like, um, people will likely have played a lot more video games than miniature games, and I think it's very
mhm.
similar, like, to think about the spectrum there between, a game with a very rich controlled story that I am playing through. Like, I'm playing as Nathan Drake. He's got these obstacles to overcome. There's going to be some action
Mhm.
set pieces where I'm going to be, fighting with particular things, or some puzzle things where I'm going to have to navigate environments. But ultimately, I am I am here to enjoy a story that is somewhat linear and is going to be,
Right.
it's going to be well crafted, versus something where I'm just dumped in the middle of an environment and there's no pretense of me really having a path to follow. There's just discovery. And then even further, there's like, well, I'm dumped on a Tetris screen. Like, play Tetris. Like, what world building do we need here?
That would be upsetting if they tried to world build for Tetris. I think it's not meant for that. Like this is just digitized Connect Four kind of like.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that, like, in miniature games, I don't think we get as close to that, like, controlled narrative, um,
Hmm.
as video games do, and that is, I think, fundamentally because of the form. Like, the form invites you to bring your own creativity into the physical hobby aspect, and so that, you know it's very similar to role-playing games, in that, like, role-playing games, there are examples where you play preset characters and you play through very controlled stories, and they tend to be
Hmm.
one-offs. They're the kind of convention games that people play, not exclusively but mostly, and that's because, most people, the reason they're there is they want to bring a lot of themselves and their own imagination and creativity in. And so the kind of content or the kind of game systems that you write has to the most successful ones are going to make affordances for that need for players. And so the same is true for, even with Rangers of Shadow Deep, which is, a miniatures game with lots of little adventure modules that you play through. Like, ultimately, Joe doesn't know what exactly your rangers are going to look like, and what
Hmm.
abilities and skills and weapons they're going to have. He doesn't know exactly what's going to turn up. He's, for every scenario, he's got like this big random encounter table, and so he doesn't
Yeah.
know. He knows roughly what the story beats that could emerge are, but he doesn't know what story beats will emerge in any given play session, and in what order, and whether you'll survive them. And so it's kind of fun, because it's sort of like it's an emergent story sort of creation engine. And so your setting also needs to be robust enough to kind of, um to be able to accept a bunch of, like, unexpected outcomes, because random things will lead to stuff that happens that you're like, well, this will never happen, and it wouldn't make sense if it did, but it won't happen anyway. But of course, that will be the thing that happens to some player somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Don't put
there's like a robustness, and I think that, like, pushing a little bit away from the detail, and particularly, I think, and this might be my proclivity, but, like, I don't see a lot of miniature games that write a lot of characters. It's a lot of, like, let me create, factions or kind of
yeah.
groups of people into which you could step into the line of those people, and you could have your own individual. Versus, there are a few examples where, like, I don't know if you know the game Malifaux. It describes itself as a character-driven skirmish
Yeah.
game, and in that,
Um,
you're buying these lovely miniatures, but each one represents a named individual with a set of, backstories that you can read, and a set of, interactions with the other characters around it. Um, and that, I think, is, that's quite unusual.
yeah. I think it is. I've not played it. I do. I know that some people in the audience have played it, as well as editor AJ. Um, and
It's a phenomenal game, actually. Just, like, from a pure mechanic standpoint, it's a phenomenal game. One of my favorites.
that's the impression I get. And but yeah, I think that also just kind of goes to show, like, there aren't really any hard and fast rules here. Like, as far as like, Malifaux is a very successful game that's got a huge, like, at least has
Right, but,
a
like, I guess one of the things that's critical about Malifaux is, or not critical, but, like, one of the ways that they have approached this is that they have done the classic. There is a city, it's full of
Mhm.
factions, and there's always stuff going on in this city. And so once you've described the city of Malifaux, like, and then you can have some, like, well, there's a swamp over here, and there's a bit, like, they've drawn a little map,
Right.
and now I've got all the locations that I need. And because, although there's named characters, like, a lot of the goings on are very genre tropey sort of, they're either like mystical, magical, like wizards battling over arcane knowledge, or they're gunfighters in a sort of weird old west.
Yeah.
And so you can connect all that, and you'd be like, all right, so there's a sort of big old west city, except it's got wizards in it. I get it. Like, this is fine. We can work
Yeah.
with this. So
Yeah.
yeah. So even then, although they've introduced specific characters and they've told you what their motivations are, they're creating a very open playground for you.
Yeah. And also they have the Into the Breach, I believe is called the like the role playing game set in the same setting. So you can go and make your own wizard or gunslinger. Um,
That's true. Yeah, I haven't actually played that, but yeah,
yeah,
that
I
is.
know that one comes highly recommended by other members of the club. So it's on my increasingly long list of games I'd like to play someday. Um, that never seems to get any shorter. But speaking of games that I have played, so you had mentioned once, and this was actually in an episode of Rule of Carnage, that you and some friends wanted to kind of explore the world of Gaslands. So you ran a Gaslands game using the Savage World system.
That's right.
So yeah, so Savage Worlds is a system that I'm a big fan of.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just kind of curious, like, we talk about like kind of storying through your world, like seeing if it works, seeing if the thing that you think, the concepts you think you can write a story about or write a game about or whatever, see if they actually feel right. And so like it seems like that's sort of what you were doing, but you were playing the game with Savage Worlds, and I was kind of curious like how you ran that, because like for one thing, Savage Worlds being setting agnostic has like a lot of rules for like how to use magic and stuff like that, which felt like I was just wondering, how did you provide guide rails for your friends, your players, and then like say, now go do the thing.
Well, so I guess like the fact that we use Savage Worlds is kind of neither here nor there. Like, we could have used any system that was quick enough for us to learn
Mm-hmm.
and feel comfortable with. I actually chose Savage World because it has a decent set of chase rules, which I figured was going to be important if we were
Okay.
in
Yeah.
vehicles. So that was the specific reason for choosing that. But we could have gone with a number of other things. Um, what I wanted, basically, I briefed them and I said, look, I want to explore this particular area of the setting, and I sort of created a disused train station in Tokyo and explained what was going on and who they could roughly be, and they created their own characters. But
Mm-hmm.
what I wanted to do was to, exactly as I said, like on the table, we've got this race arena or track or whatever, and we just don't see what's beyond it. So the point of this was to step outside of that and just have a little look around and see what kind of stuff was going on. And so um, one of the factions is Miyazaki. She's like in the setting, she's like a courier, high speed courier, and it's all kind of like sleek sort of Japanese sports car kind of polished. It's not what you would. It's not exactly cyberpunk, but it's not what you would expect from a post-apocalyptic setting. And so
Right.
we wanted to just try, like, okay, well, let's feel like, what is it like to be a courier in this setting, in the sort of ruins of Tokyo, and let's see what happens. Like, do we meet monsters? Do we meet gunslingers? Like, just allow our imaginations to carry ourselves through this sort of embryonic, undescribed world. And I can't recall if I set any specific guidelines around it, but like the genre tropes were clear enough that we didn't, in the sessions that we played, encounter anything that I had to like veto out of the world. But at the same time, I didn't
Mhm.
really know what was going to be allowed, and so I guess it was a case of kind of feeling through. And I did the same thing for A Billion Suns, actually. Like, I wanted
Oh
to
yeah.
I wanted to find out what it was like to be in this particular world. And so a friend of mine who'd read the setting for A Billion Suns, which again is quite a light setting, but it's
Mm-hmm.
basically, it's the year is 3000, like mega globalization has sort of reached its interstellar kind of obvious conclusion. And so like the galaxy is like tremendously expanding in terms of the inhabited planets, but it's all like owned by corporations, and they're all, you know, trading exo worlds for mining rights and all this kind of stuff. And he just immediately caught onto this. He was like, okay, we're going to play a campaign where you guys are in these like warships, but they're supposed to be guarding this thing, and the auditors are going to turn up, and you're going to have to deal with the auditors. And we were like, no, the auditors. Yep, and they're going to check your taxes, and it's going to be terrible. And kind of created this this sort of political intrigue. Hide and seek kind of a situation where it's like, okay, what is it like to be in this like ludicrous, overblown sort of 2000 AD does the corporate boardroom, but it's in spaceships. And it was just fun to just sort of like find what jokes we found were funny, and what about that setting we wanted, that we were enjoying amping up and overplaying and stuff.
So, given the bureaucratic nature of the game, did you use GURPS for your?
That's a great question. Well, I have no memory of what system we used for that. My regular play group is fairly chill on ever even picking up the dice. So the system that we play
Okay.
sort of is all, yeah, we're very, I wouldn't say like we're very story focused, but we're very like, we know how it would feel, like what the right answer is, and so, you know, we'll roll dice sometimes to surprise ourselves. But yeah,
That's cool.
um,
Yeah, it seems like it would be like it'd be a great setting to play with Traveller, because
Traveller
they're
would have been
both,
the right one. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
they're
right.
both basically space debt simulators.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Exactly.
it's just,
Traveller would have been the right one. I don't think I've ever played Traveller. I had a copy of it as a kid, and I used to read it and reread it and reread it. My old copy of Traveller was very well thumbed, but I don't think
yeah,
very well played.
it's like the only system in which you can die during character creation.
Yes, exactly.
It's
And so I
yeah.
think with Hobgoblin, I didn't have an opportunity to do that. But for me, writing bits of microfiction, so I wrote a lot of microfiction first,
Mhm.
because two reasons. One is I wasn't confident writing fiction because I haven't done a lot of it, and the other is I wanted to so there is a thing in gaming materials. It happens a lot in role-playing games, but it also does happen a lot in miniature games, where you get like the Lonely Planet guide to insert fantasy world, and it's like written in this really ridiculous, like, you know, sort of like poor quality history textbook / Lonely Planet sort of tourism guides to like what is in the world.
Mhm.
And I sort of hate it, because it's really unconnected. It's this like floating head sort of descriptor of like what the world is like. And so with Hobgoblin, I was like, well, I'm going to write a lot more background and setting information for this. Like, can I write it from eye level? Can I write it from the point of view of the characters rather than from these omniscient, you know, Wikipedia article kind of tone of voice?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to try that, and what I did was I wrote a lot, maybe sort of 40-50 pieces of microfiction, and that became part of like, it filled in the same role as those like role playing explorations, where it was like, okay, let me pick a viewpoint character and just see what it looks like if you're like the
Mhm.
jailer who's got a prince locked in a dungeon somewhere, or let's see what it's like if you're the goblin that's poking its fingers into like little bug holes to try and see if there's any like secret notes that other people have left that he can, you know, find clues about treasures from, and oh, he's got bitten.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's yeah, it sounds like you've got like, yeah, it's a world that you could just put any kind of hook in. Or I shouldn't say any kind, like there's a vibe, but it's like, you know, it's just enough boundaries that your imagination can really do something with it. Because if you just tell me it's
That's
a
right.
fantasy world, I got nothing to go on.
That's right. You need some walls to bounce off of.
Yeah.
Like, constraints breed creativity. That's equally true for players trying to come into your world.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, but you've also got to leave most of the area open so that they can go where they like,
Yeah.
and fit whatever they want into that world. So yeah, so I don't know, like it's super interesting to me, like writing. settings, writing worlds, building worlds for miniature gamers to game in, like it is something that I have come to slowly realize is sort of its own. It's got its own nuances and flavor to it, and being good at that is not, I don't think, going to make me particularly any better as like a novel writer. But it is a craft that I'm excited by. It'll probably make me a better video game writer. I could probably do like an open world video game. Like, probably share a lot of the same characteristics of it. But yeah, so those are some of the things that I think about it. I'm trying to think if there's any other big pieces here, because a lot of the where the rubber hits the road in the like implementation of this stuff is, I think a lot more of it happens in the rules system than people necessarily realize on first blush. So I mentioned it at the beginning, but like um, how you name the rules in the game, like what you name the stats, what you name kind of the phases and parts. Like, is this an initiative phase or is it a command phase? Like, these things all link to the central conceit of like, okay, well, if it's an initiative phase, then I'm a hero. If it's a command phase, then I'm a general. If it's like a carnage phase, then we know things are going to be going wrong all the time. If it's a, if it's a cleanup phase, then we know it's a considered thing. And that, I suppose, is the other thing, is that um, in straight fiction writing, we are just explaining what is going on. In game writing, what I'm literally doing is measuring distances and rolling dice, and they have nothing to do with the fact that I'm shooting a gun. In like, my character is supposed to be shooting a gun, I'm actually rolling a dice. There's no connection between those two things. I have to provide these little minor conceits where I'm linking the mechanics of the game, which are essentially completely abstract, to a fantasy that I'm trying to evoke in the player's mind. And I've set the fantasy up by selling them like, you're an interstellar gunslinger and you're going to be collecting loot on behalf of, your employees. Okay, great. That's the fantasy of who I am. Like, how do these little pieces of game mechanics get connected to that fantasy? And simple things like naming those things correctly, or, using the right kind of shaped dice or the right number of dice in your mechanics. They're all sort of the intricacies of how you connect what the player is actually doing to what the player is supposed to be thinking about at the time that they're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Just kind of setting the tone. Um, yeah, that's great. I think this is, um, I think that there are so many different things to build worlds for, and there are these different applications and everything. But I do think that idea, those, having those core concepts, and then having, like, as you put it, the guardrails to bounce off of.
Mm.
Um, I think that is where, regardless of whether you're giving that as a toolkit to, um, your audience, or whether you are saying, okay, this is my starting point, and now I'm going to explore and then give it to you later after this is more fleshed out. Like, the those early those early things are very similar. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, I would love to just to get an idea then, as we come up on time here, just of what you're working on these days, what worlds you're building, and then before we go, I'll make sure you can also just tell people where they can find you, on the various platforms.
Totally. So what am I working on at the moment? So I'm working on a number of games ideas. I have like a rack over here of like 15
Mm-hmm.
different game ideas that I'm working on, because I'm totally like scatterbrained about this stuff, and things, just glints of dust in the light, catch my eye, and I dance over to something new. So a couple of things that I will mention I'm working on right now. I just um, a little while back from, it's today when we're recording, so it'll be a little while in the past when this gets released. I just
Mm-hmm.
released a game called Space Gits, which is a game about drunk ass space orcs looting and shooting and scooting, and it's a really dumb game about uh, can I get dice dexterity mechanics to work in a miniatures game? So to move your rolling dice into the play area, like when you take damage, you're stacking up more and more dice next to your miniature, which you then have to move around without knocking the dice tower over. Um, so it's a chaotic, ridiculous, like physical dexterity game, and so I wanted to create a world where that makes sense. And so I was chatting to a friend today that like I was trying to figure out like I know that this is a sort of urban setting for space orcs, but I don't know exactly what's going on. And they suggested, well, maybe all of the like warrior orcs have gone to do the war, and it's just like these gits that are left like just wrecking the place, getting drunk because like none of the big bruiser orcs are around, and then all the warriors will come back and just like, oh, you trashed it again. Like I can't even like what? How did you drink all this like beer? So yeah, I'm kind of messing around with what like the ridiculous setting for space kits is. And
Yeah.
the other thing
I'm,
that's sorry, go ahead.
I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what the community does as far as putting together models, because I am sure that people aren't just going to bring their orcs to the table. They're going to,
Yes,
glue some beer steins into their hands and so on.
yeah,
So
that's what I'm hoping. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. And then the other thing that I'm working on, like particularly I'm thinking about from a world building perspective, is I've got a game called Junk Space, which is
Mhm.
a starfighter. Well, basically the simplest way to describe it is it's like X-Wing the miniatures game and Gaslands and Frostgrave are going to have a baby together. So it's like you're a sort of ramshackle spaceship uh, crew of like two or three spaceships. It's a bit like Firefly, like you don't have much and you're
Mhm.
scrapping from one job to the next. You're like picking up loot and stuff. So it's kind of a post-apocalyptic spaceship game. And so because I because I like create like A Billion Suns and Gaslands live in the same timeline, and I like doing that because it's just fun for me. Like it's not because I'm building an IP. It's just like, well, I've got themes that I enjoy. Let me play around with these some more. So
Yeah.
um, this is going to be set in a little corner of the Billion Suns universe, which is going to be our solar system in this year 3000. Like everybody moved to the stars, and what's left is this just garbage heap of like space debris, and like they destroyed all of the moons of Jupiter for their like rare minerals, and it's just trash everywhere. And you don't have enough money to get like a starship ticket to Betelgeuse, and you definitely can't afford an interstellar engine for your like tiny space fighter. So you're just there with everyone else, like just sort of picking over the bones of the solar system, scrapping over the scraps.
Mhm.
And so I'm trying to at the moment trying to bring in some ideas about, okay, well, who lives in this environment, what kind of factions, what kind of peoples, what sort of cultures have formed, and where are they living, and am I going to draw like a little map of the solar system, like the post-apocalyptic solar system? Like that might be a fun way to start it. Or am I going to zoom in and I'm going to be like, well, here's a little portion of this that like that summarizes everything that I want to say about this, but is only like it's one space station. It's like the Babylon 5 summary of the universe or something. I don't know how I'm going to approach that yet. I do know what its major kind of concerns are. Like I know what the conceit is. I've described who you are and what it is that you're trying to get and why you can't get it, and that's kind of enough. The rest of it will fit into place. I just need to do the work.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so then I guess just where can people find you?
Yeah, well, so as I'm doing that work, the place that you can follow along, because I'm trying to share my journey as I quit my job, I quit my career at the beginning of this year to take games design full time, which is an experiment. I don't know if it's going to work, but you can join me on that journey to find out how hard I crash and burn on this over at Planet Smasher Games on YouTube or planetsmashergames.com. And yeah, I'm posting like as I'm working through games, as I'm recording prototypes, explorations, as I'm sort of thinking about different elements of the games design process. I'm trying to record as much as I can and kind of share how that's working. And then, of course, you've already mentioned it a couple of times, but also on YouTube or podcasting apparatus is the Rule of Carnage, and Rule of Carnage is me and Glenn basically dissecting endless game design topics, specifically around designing better miniature games. And by golly, by gosh, we thought we'd have like maybe a 10 or 15 episodes of content to talk about, but we are like 200 episodes in and in no way running out of things to say about miniature games. So, you know,
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll have links to all that stuff in the show notes. Um, So thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great discussion. I think there will be a lot for people to take from this. Um, but with that, I'll give you the last word if you'd like it, and then we'll cut over to James. So,
Thank you so much, Dave. It's been great to be here.
all right, thank you.